the CERP that we develop is exactly what you want, and that it has the flexibility to be adjusted as needed as you move into implementation. We had a really candid discussion about timing as well. We talked about what needs to happen and by when. And then, as I mentioned last time, it's really important for groups like this to just take stock and to reset and make sure things are moving forward appropriately, because we do want to make sure that this CERP reflects your priorities and your voices. And we know that this process in the virtual environment is going to be a little messy. It's a little difficult, social distancing and doing this virtually. So we want to work through the process slowly, but also within the timeline that we need to meet some of the goals that we have. So we do have a plan, and we've been working really closely with your community co-hosts and some of the leadership team members within the Stockton community to help iron out some of the kinks as we find them, and we're going to keep finding them. But we're working together to do that, and we're working together to make sure that this meets your expectations. So tonight we only have a few topics on the agenda, and that is intentional. We want to respect and honor your time, so we're going to start on time and end on time tonight. So you can expect that this meeting will end right around 7 o'clock. And one of the things you're going to see, we're going to ask Kim to flip to the agenda slide so we can show you kind of what we're going to be discussing tonight. So first things first, on this agenda, we have a presentation from your community co-host, and then we're going to move right into the CERP measure review. And we're going to discuss at the end of the conversation the CERP extension request to CARB that we briefly talked about at the last meeting. We want to revisit that today, make sure that we're on track there and discuss that before we adjourn. Even though this looks like a really short agenda, it's actually pretty ambitious. And walking you through that CERP process is actually going to be a very step-by-step process to make sure that everyone on this committee understands how we can do this in a virtual environment, what the roles are, what the timelines are, and what needs to get done by when. So we're going to try to accomplish the objectives for today's meeting in what looks like a long 2 hours, but it's actually going to be a pretty short 2 hours because there is going to be a lot of conversation, a lot of opportunity to discuss, and a lot of opportunity to Zoom back and forth with your feedback. So we're going to dispense with the very long Zoom instructions today, but I'm going to ask Kim to go back to the Zoom etiquette slide just to remind you all of the Zoom etiquette. The biggest things to remember are that your screen name is accurate so that we can make sure that if you are eligible for stipends, that you are able to get credit for your meeting time. If you are in the stipend program, you should stay on the line for 75% of this meeting to get credit for the meeting and to be eligible for the reimbursement. And just as a note, this is a meeting that is being recorded and that there will be public comments at the end. This CSC meeting the Zoom portion is limited to CSC members, but the public is invited to participate via Facebook. And so comments and questions will be checked and followed through Facebook and submitted to the email address during the public comment period. Facebook Live will end when the meeting ends, but again, every meeting we always are willing to stay on the line a little bit longer if the CSC members have additional questions. CARB and the Air District typically have a few extra minutes if we need to answer any clarifying questions. So the Zoom controls are on the slide right now. Please note that we will continue with our process of raising your blue hand to speak. And please do, as always, stay on mute unless you are speaking or planning to speak. That does help us keep the chatter down and the noise pollution from the background. And if you could please continue to use the chat box as you so accurately and actively do, we do love that, and it is all part of the meeting record. So those are all the specifics and logistics for today. And now, as always, I'd like to turn it over to our host and community co-host for their welcome for discussing some of the other elements of the meeting. Ryan will represent the Air District, and our community co-host this month, well, this meeting, since we're having multiple meetings in a month, is Stacy Penyasi. Ryan and Stacy, you're up.
Good evening, everyone. I hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving and are looking forward to getting back to work. And I know it's difficult times for a lot of people, and at the same time, there's a lot to be thankful for. You know, every day we're here and get to do important work like this. These are just some of them. So I'm definitely thankful for this opportunity to continue to work with all of you through this process. You know, looking to do this for the residents of Stockton. So I will definitely turn this over to Stacy. Looking forward to her presentation and a little bit of perspective on, once again, why this work is so important. So thanks, everyone.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your time. I very much appreciate it. All right, is everyone able to see my screen?
Yes.
You're looking good. Yeah, we've got it.
Great, thank you so much. And so my presentation is on the front line, living the impacts of air pollution every day. I'm one of many residents. I'm a new mom to a 1-year-old daughter, and she's right there depicted. My partner is a mail carrier who serves the zip codes in Stockton AB 617 community with the worst air quality. And I have family members, as you can see in this photo here, who suffer from asthma. The stars mark the areas in which I've lived over the past 30 years, and you can see that it's been heavily polluted with NOx emissions, including PM 2.5, diesel particulate emissions, and VOC emissions, VOC, I'm sorry. 74. Now, South Stockton residents have an average life expectancy of approximately 74 years. That's a difference of 4 years from San Joaquin County and difference of 7 years for the state of California. At my current age, I have approximately 44 more years to live. And that's a scary thing for me to know. I joined the Stockton AB 617 steering committee for 2 reasons. One, that access to clean air is a human right, and I needed to practice that. And 2, it is important for the voices of my community and the most vulnerable, marginalized to be heard, especially when our lives are directly impacted by the decisions we make. And so I'd like to live the rest of the half of that I have in my life doing so. These are some challenges and fears, concerns that I have. How can we work together to prolong the lives of thousands who are negatively impacted by major sources of pollution, including the Port of Stockton and DTE? Every day, every morning I wake up, Monday through Friday, on my way to work, I see this plume of smoke, and it may be water vapor, but is it really? Is it? So at what cost will it take for every resident in my community to have access to clean air? When will it be safe for children to play outside without having to think twice about emissions that are harmful to their health? So let us work together, because the decisions we make moving forward will have a direct impact on 132,000 lives and growing. So let's thoroughly review the measures and save lives. I have a very short clip I'd like to share.
One day, a man was walking along the beach.
Hey, Stacy, I'm hearing your screen, but not seeing it. Does anyone else see a visual?
No.
Yeah, is there a way? We're not seeing it, we're hearing it though.
Yeah, sure, just one moment. Let me go ahead and.
Maybe a reshare. You probably have to share a different screen. You need to share your video, your internet screen.
Are you able to see that now?
I see internet.
One day,
there we go.
a man was walking along the beach when he noticed a boy picking up starfish and throwing them into the ocean. Approaching the boy, he asked, "Excuse me, but what are you doing?" The boy replied, "Throwing starfish back into the ocean. The sun is rising and the tide is going out. If I don't throw them back, they'll die." The man laughed to himself and said, "But there's too many starfish on this beach. You can't possibly make a difference." After listening politely, the boy bent down
I lost sound. Did you all lose sound as well? Yeah.
Yeah.
Stacy, can we ask you to maybe drop the link into the chat, and then we can try and click on it separately? I'm afraid we may not be able to see and hear at the same time. Actually, we might have lost Stacy in general.
Seems like
I think we did. So what we will do is ask Stacy to do that when she gets back on, and it looks like we lost her, which is, you know, this is the Zoom world we live in. Internet connections come and go. When she comes back on, we will graciously thank her for the time and effort she's put into pulling together a presentation. And, you know, in the spirit of the fact that we just all finished a week of Thanksgiving and hopefully some gratitude, it's nice to kind of reflect on what each of us kind of do and why we are involved in this process. And so it's really helpful to kind of hear from our community co-hosts about why they believe in this effort, why they've committed to it, why they're volunteering. And certainly we'll leave some time during the conversation for you guys to ask Stacy questions if you have them, and hopefully we'll all get to see her video as well. So
I'm sorry, everyone, I got cut off.
There she is. Perfect, come on back. So we couldn't see the video. If you do want to put the link to it in the chat, we'll all be able to take a look at it, but maybe you could just give us a high level overview and make sure that you got to say everything you wanted to say as part of your co-host remarks.
Right, well, just believing that, you know, collectively we can make the biggest positive difference working together. It may take, you know, time and effort, but I appreciate all the time we are putting in order to truly save lives. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome, thanks. Let's give Stacy a virtual round of applause via Zoom or otherwise. Did anyone have any questions for Stacy? Perfect. Well, as I mentioned earlier, we have a pretty aggressive and important agenda item to talk about today. We've been thinking really critically about this process and really thinking about what can we do to make sure that if you think about Stacy's presentation, the priorities that each of you have, individual motivations that each of you have, that we can really center those as we work through the process of developing the CERP, and as we work through the process of making sure that you all feel like your voices are heard during this effort. So we have a pretty strong and busy agenda. We're on schedule, we're doing great. But I wanted to talk you through how we're going to approach tonight and then begin the process. I'm going to, before we go to the slides, actually, we'll pull back for just a second, Kim. I'll move it in to this item. But first, if we look at the agenda, as I mentioned, we're just going to talk CERP strategies. We're just going to talk about the extension, and we're just going to talk about how we kind of get through the foundational pieces. And as we discussed a little bit earlier, you know, this requires a little bit of flexibility. It requires a lot of patience, and we appreciate that. There are over 24 different strategies recommended in the draft CERP so far that you have seen. So our goal for tonight really is going to be to refine our process for reviewing the strategies. And that's why there's only a few things on the agenda today. We want to be thorough, but we also want to move quickly. And really figure out how to do the balancing act with this virtual meeting. So during the last meeting, you said that you really like seeing measures on the screen. You also said you wanted a little bit more time to discuss the items, which is why the agenda is as light as it is. And our job as facilitators is to really help you simplify this while honoring all the wishes that you all have. So if you think back, not the last meeting, but the meeting before, we started to show you a list of all of the measures. And there it was a Word document. It had a lot of text on it. It had a lot of comments from everyone. And that was a distillation of an Excel document that had been shared with everybody even before that. And many of you provided written feedback. And if you did, that feedback was literally captured in those strategies. So there's seen a couple different versions of the CERP as it stands right now. But the bottom line is this: there is a lot of information to digest. And we've heard from you both in meetings and even behind the scenes that there's just a lot and there's a little confusion. So what we're going to do today is walk you through this step by step. We're going to talk about process and we're going to build the foundation so you understand how this is going to work and then what you need to do as a committee. So Kim, can you move us to the CERP development process slide? Perfect. So this is a document and a slide that you have already seen. We showed this at the last meeting. We want to make sure you're familiar with this process so that you know where we are. So let's go through line by line and kind of show you kind of how this all goes through. So you've already gone through the first two boxes where you've identified areas of concern and you've gone and worked together to develop measures. Then you go through and you identify and provide comments and prioritization of those measures. And that was when the Air District sent you a survey in an email, and you guys all kind of went in and kind of ranked your preferences in terms of the measures. And then the process goes into reviewing those individual measures and figuring out how and if they fit into the CERP. Then you select the measures that go in the final CERP, you refine the budget for them, and then you prepare the full CERP or the final CERP, and you go through that process again. The CSC is going to approve the CERP. If you go down to this bottom left bucket that's green, the CSC approves the CERP, and then it gets sent to the CARB, and then you begin year 2 implementation of your tactics. So the CERP is one step in a multi-step process for getting the real core of what AB 617 is all about. As we've all discussed, the CERP is actually technically due to CARB by the end of this year, but that we're going to be exploring at the end of this meeting an extension on that so that we can really make sure that the CERP that we develop is what you all want to see and that you feel really comfortable with where it is before we do that. So the next thing we want to talk about, so we're talking about CERP development, but one thing we haven't figured out is, and I don't think you all get, is what the measures are themselves. We've got pages and pages of information about measures, but we realize we haven't done maybe the best job of explaining what a measure is, what the final measure should look like, how it should be written. So I'm going to turn it over now to Jamie to talk a little bit about a measure, show you what measures look like and maybe what they've looked like in other communities so you can understand what it is we're working toward. We're building a CERP, we're developing a CERP, but how and what? So let's figure out this burning question and have Jamie answer this for us before we go even deeper into the CERP development. So Jamie, please help us understand the measure itself.
Great. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to share my screen as well. And we just pulled one example. We went with urban greening and vegetative barriers, that strategy. And we pulled some examples of how other communities have defined their CERP strategy in the CERP document. And we just want you to see how high level it is. The exact details of who we're going to work with, how we're going to work with, the name of the people, the number of locations and all that type of stuff. That's something that honing in happens during the implementation phase. So I think we had several other community CERPs that we were looking through, but I believe that this first one is Imperial and the second one South Coast, but don't quote me on that. But as you can see, in example 1, they even put these two strategies together.
Jamie, can you zoom in on the document a little so we can see example 1 a little better?
I can, and let me also get my little tool. I still zoom in, yeah. So in example 1, again, we think this is Imperial. It's Imperial. They've taken urban greening and vegetative barriers, and this is how they explain it. Possible locations include, identify that we'll work to create a plan that will identify possible locations where urban greening and tree installation will occur. Then if you look down at the next example, which I think is South Coast, they still keep them separated, and our proposal is still to keep them separated. But, types and locations of projects will be developed with input from the steering committee, looking at, locations to be determined. They list some partners, but they also say, and others, to investigate and identify suitable areas. Same thing here. partnering, collaborating, engaging with other areas, and really looking to decide what these strategies on the ground, ready to go, will be like once implementation begins. And then these are early drafts. These have already been edited a little bit based on some of the feedback from last night. But we have tried to capture the comments that have been made, but at the same time, we also want to keep it a really high level. We want to make sure that there is flexibility once we get to the implementation stage, so that we can be flexible and responsive to what the Community Steering Committee suggestions and needs are. Another thing to consider as we're looking at these CERP strategies that we're going to talk about, this is a living document. Your CERP can be changed. The intent is for it to grow and blossom, and there's an annual report process that happens. In each of these strategies, even though they seem like just a couple sentences right now, they turn into subcommittees, and they turn into you know, contracts and agreements and proposals that go to CARB. So all of that stuff happens in the implementation phase. In the CERP, you're just kind of putting down at a high level the things that you as a community want to see as a part of the strategy, and then the details of it, that's really looking into the next year. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. I'm going to stop sharing.
Perfect. Thank you, Jamie. So that's very high level, what the strategies have to include. There, if you notice, 3, 4, maybe 5 sentences. No share yet, Kim. Just give 1 second if you don't mind. There are only 5 or 6 sentences max. Even if you've ever done any strategic planning, if any of you have done it in your professional lives, even if you're residents, it's the high level part that's strategy. And the next stage after this part's done will be the tactical implementation. So we don't have to have every specific ironed out for this stage. We just need the big picture concept for this portion. So what questions do you have for Jamie? What specific questions about measures and what's in them before we move on to some other process doc elements, because there's a little more we're going to give you. I see Matt's hand.
Let me unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. I actually was thinking along the lines of a question that Robin posted in the chat about sort of the ongoing oversight of the implementation phase, and it looks like somebody responded to her there. So totally comfortable with compass points in a planning document and having high level descriptions of what measures should accomplish and roughly where. But I think a lot of people, you know, want to know that the devil is in the details and what's the ongoing oversight process like. And then I'll just also bring up that in my experience in the West Oakland committee, that each of the significant measures had its own subcommittee to direct and design the implementation. But most importantly, they had an agency lead. And so when they were talking vegetative barriers in West Oakland, the facilitator and the lead for that group was a representative of Caltrans. So, you know, I would like to hear if we've anticipated any of those planning and collaborative strategies in the implementation phase.
If we've incorporated strategies in the implementation phase, we have done some of that in the implementation phase. And the best example is that we have numerous subcommittees. So we have, just in Fresno, let's see if I can name them all. We have a air monitoring subcommittee. We have a school air filtration subcommittee. We have a truck reroute subcommittee. We have a vegetative barriers and urban greening subcommittee. And those are just the ones that are being worked on that were prioritized for right now. And I will tell you that there are some of the steering committee members that are in every single one of those subcommittee meetings. And so and then we also have the monthly regular steering committee meeting. So for some folks that want to go deep, they're having, you know, upwards of 5 meetings a month on some of these issues. And then in one of those committees, we even have a subcommittee of the subcommittee.
But to get to Matt's point, for example, like we have a pesticide measure in chapter, which DPR is the one pretty much leading that one. And we are definitely, along with CARB, as a helping to support them on that measure.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. You know, if the agency that has right of access and control isn't in the conversation, we can be as creative as we want. So, you know, city reps, DOT reps, got to be in those conversations the whole time. Sweet. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks for that, Matt. Yeah, we have. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's been one of the encouraging aspects of working with Stockton. We've had tremendous support from the city, county, various agencies. We have had a ton of support from the CBOs through this process, helping to coordinate a lot of those interactions. And so, yeah, we're expecting once we hit the implementation phase that we will hit the ground running and move hopefully very quickly.
Awesome, thank you. Any other questions for Jamie about the measures or about how measures need to be drafted or thought through? Is there anything that you have questions about before we move on to the foundational pieces of like timing and meetings and how do we work through this CERP development itself? I don't see any blue hands. If anybody needs to unmute themselves without a hand, now's a good time. Otherwise, we're going to keep going.
I see a couple.
All right, that's okay.
I don't know if anybody's monitoring the chat on districts.
Yes, we are, and I am seeing Tina's blue hand, and then I also see there's some chat questions in here from Catherine. We're taking a look at those right now.
Yeah, sorry if this has already been said, but who's actually going to be writing up those paragraphs?
The Air District actually will take those first and has taken the lead on it so far and will continue to refine.
Okay, thank you.
Catherine, I see your hand.
Yeah, thanks. So one is the question that I just posed under the chat, clarifying the policy for compensating community volunteers, whether that can be extended to the subcommittees if we're going to. I agree, logistically, that makes a lot of sense, but again, want to make sure that we're really respecting residents' time. And then also just wanted to put in a request to have the same overview of how the CERP measures work and examples from other CERPs for the enforcement measures. I understand tonight we're just talking about the incentives piece.
Definitely. I'll let the Air District talk about the stipends. And then to your point about the process, absolutely. We're going to walk you through for both sections of measures. We'll do the same thing to make sure everyone's really clear.
Yeah, that's a good point, Catherine. So basically what we've done is we followed basically the statewide guidance that was developed basically with the ARB's consultation working group. I can tell you from personal experience that the subcommittees that we've been having in Fresno and chapter, we have the resident members have been a part of those meetings, and we haven't seen a drop off. But I understand the point that you raised, and we'd have to maybe look to have that conversation at a statewide level.
Great, thank you for that question. And I do see one additional question about Boggs Track that I'll leave to the Air District to answer in the chat, and then we will keep moving just to keep our agenda going. Thanks for those questions so far. All right, I'm going to ask Kim to put up the next slide on the screen so you can see where we're going with process. So as you can see, the red circled mark identifies where we are in this CERP development process so far. And as you might have heard, we've actually only shown you 25 of the measures that we're considering for one section. There's also a whole different set of measures that we also need to review that will be part of the CERP as well. So we have over 50 measures that we've got to really think through, talk through, and really identify that whether or not we want to include them in the CERP. So at the last meeting, we talked about an extension to the final CERP and when we want to submit that to CARB. And the Air District's actually taken the liberty of proposing a date for that. Kim, if you can go to the next slide. We have, based on what we think we need to do and what we think we can accomplish, proposed a March date for the Air District to approve the CERP through their board and then submit something to CARB. So it's an extension requesting a little extra time through March to review and finalize the CERP. With that schedule in mind, this is how we would propose to accomplish all the key milestones necessary for CERP development. So this is what a future meeting schedule and work plan would look like based on that new date. And today's meeting is here in orange. So I'm going to read this slide and explain it to you starting at the left. The first stage is really to select the measures for inclusion in the CERP. That's where we are right now. That's where we are today. Today's meeting would include that topic, and that's a major portion of what we're doing today. We're proposing that the January 6th meeting, which is already on the books and is a standing meeting, would also be used to discuss that, and not just the 25 that we've already kind of got on our radar, but the other 25 or so that we haven't looked at yet. And then we'd also, if we need to, add an additional January meeting to talk about this section to really make sure that the measures are discussed at the level of depth that you want. And we could do that in January. Then the next proposal would be to have the Air District provide this committee with another draft CERP to review, something to look at, and that would be February 3rd. And we would review and discuss that document on February 3rd in the standing meeting for this committee. Then, if we need another meeting, February 17th, we can continue to review and discuss that draft and go over it, make some adjustments, maybe even have the budget conversation at one of these two meetings, either February 3rd or 17th, where we go in and move money around, thinking about how to really work through all the specifics needed to make sure the CERP is exactly what you want. And then on March 3rd, this group would finalize and vote on that draft CERP and make it final, and then propose that final draft to go to the Air District Board for their March 18th board meeting. If they submitted it to their board in time for the March 18th board meeting, it could then go to CARB shortly thereafter. So that's the proposed work plan and meeting schedule based on utilizing today's meeting for a specific effort. And we're going to talk you through what that is. And before we do that, I'm going to see if there's any hands, any questions we have about this proposed schedule. And I want to make sure that the Air District, you guys tell us if we got it right, if there's anything we didn't cover as it relates to this proposed schedule and work plan, knowing that we're going to talk about the extension and the letter at the end of this meeting. I see no hands, but I do see some comments about conflict questions. And these dates that are listed here as a disclaimer were just recommendations. They're not, they haven't been vetted by anyone. So the extra meetings that are on the 20th of January and the 17th of February would be, those may not be the dates. Matt Holmes, you have a question.
Hi, me again. No issues to discuss with this. I'm just wondering how this schedule accommodates what was clear at our last meeting, that we still need more time to discuss the monitoring plan. And I see December slipping away. And so I'm not seeing camp on here. I'm just seeing CERP.
Correct.
So educate me, please. Thank you.
No, that's a fantastic point, Matt. And we do want to discuss a few options with the committee. Right now what we're doing is we're looking to reach out and get specific locations of where monitoring, based on the kind of the feedback that we got, we want to bring it back to the committee along with the discussion of the draft that was sent out. We were thinking that we would do that during the next meeting. That should have probably been on here in addition to our discussions of the CERP. And then the other concept that was brought up was whether or not to help with that process. If we think that's going to take multiple meetings, if we want to explore having a subcommittee to talk about the draft camp, or if what we've also heard is just wanting to have everybody in the meetings wanting to discuss it. So we could discuss that further later on.
Well, and I'll just chime in and also say that depending on how today's meeting goes and how, you know, if we can really figure out our process and iron out the kinks, we might be able to, you know, add additional agenda items to some of these standing meetings. It may not be that we have to discuss everything in as much detail as you might think. One thing we noticed in our review process is that you guys have made really good progress. And one thing that I think Jamie has shown with the descriptions of the other measures from other communities is that our drafts are pretty close. And so we may have some discussion to have, but it may not be as much as you think, which is really fantastic. And so we could have some extra time in the existing meeting agendas and in the schedule to fit some of that camp discussion in if everyone wants to be part of every conversation. I think what you're hearing, Matt, is there is flexibility and there is the willingness to do what this committee wants to get the discussions that you want to have and meet the timelines that we need to.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate that. I think we're at a really crucial moment where this can all work out. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So today's meeting progress, you see this orange text here. It's going to determine if we can meet this schedule. And we wanted you to see this roadmap, this possible roadmap. Know that, as I mentioned, there is flexibility within it and around it to do what we need to, even if it's a subcommittee or otherwise, we can do that. Any other questions about this work plan? I'd love to take it now. Otherwise, we're going to move forward and keep you moving through this agenda, and we're going to get through some actual heavy work today as well. I don't see any more hands or comments, so I'm going to show you this slide from last time. This is our review process. We committed to explain, and we're going to over-explain this process because it's not easy. It's a little complicated, and if you miss any piece of it, you kind of lose track. And we want to make sure we are over-explain, but we want to Matt's point and to everyone's point, make sure we have the time to discuss, but also that we're focused on the right discussion, not just broad discussion for the sake of it, but really focused on the places where you really have questions. And then we want to go in and sort. And the sorting will help us focus our efforts and focus our time and make the best use of the time that we have in this virtual environment. Obviously, if we were in person and we could do some dot voting and we could do sticky notes all over a room and everybody has little mini groups, it'd be a little bit different. We don't have that luxury, and I think a lot of you want to be parts of these conversations, so we've tried to identify a process that will allow us to do that, and that's what we're going to work toward. So today is going to be our sorting meeting for the first 25 measures. There is another set of 20 to 25 that will also need to be sorted, but for now, we're going to start with the first 25, which you've already seen, you've reviewed, you've had a couple weeks to digest, and we want to go through this process. So can you go to the next slide, Kim? We are going to try and figure out how to take 50+ measures and decide which ones we want to talk about. We certainly can't talk about all 50 of them. That would take us 17 meetings and probably an entire year. But based on what we've seen so far, based on what you wrote for us, you've already gone in and figured out what ideas you love, what things you want to build into implementation. You've already kind of given us some thoughts about whether you feel something belongs in the CERP, doesn't belong in the CERP, or you're not really sure. And so what we'd like to do today is sort all the 25 measures we've seen so far into green, yellow, and red. And let me go through what a green, yellow, and red means. So the green means that most of you already agree that you want that measure in the CERP. You know that it's something that's priority for everyone, and you think the Air District can go in and refine the language. They can go in and try and make it look like the samples you just saw, the things from South Coast and the other communities. They can go in and refine what we've done already and start beginning that process so they can kind of work in a concurrent process. The yellow and red measures need a little more time. So the yellow measures mean that there's some agreement, but there's more discussion needed about how maybe to accomplish those goals before we move it into green. The red means lots of confusion, not much agreement, difficulty identifying the benefits, and maybe not even sure if it belongs in the CERP at all. We really want to separate the greens so the Air District can start working on those, and then we leave our discussion time for yellow and red. And based on the comments we've gotten so far, we already have some ideas on where you're feeling like some of these measures belong. So today's meeting is a sorting meeting. We want to show you what we've done based on what you've already provided to us and let you decide if we've made the right assignments and move some things around if we haven't. So before I keep talking, let's stop there. What questions do you have about the sorting process? Does it make sense to you? Completely confused?
And Erica, to clarify, the sorting process means if it's green, we're not spending a lot of time discussing this measure. It can go into the draft CERP. And if it's yellow or red, that means in the following up meetings, and perhaps even starting today, we're gonna do deep dive conversations on these measures, just like you guys asked.
Yeah, and we'll show you what that means. And Ryan, you've got a comment. We'll give you an example of what we're talking about, but just now's a great chance to say, hey, clarify this one or two things for me. Ryan? Yeah,
and just real quick on because it's green here, that just means that we put it into the draft. There's still going to be opportunity once everybody sees it, if there's questions, concerns, etc. We can still have time to do that. But it's just, we have general consensus that people like the concept of, for example, a vegetative barrier or urban greening.
Yeah, and we'll show you what we mean by this. And to Tina's question in the chat, are we voting on the color for each measure? No, not officially, but you are going to validate our assumptions. So we're going to show you how we've pre-sorted everything based on all the comments you've already gotten. And then you can move it around. Just general consensus. You guys can tell us if you feel like something we said was a green really is a yellow, or something that we said was a yellow really is a green. It'll be hopefully a pretty fast and fluid process once we show you what we've done. What we realized is you had 30 pages of review to do, and that's a lot of information. So we took it down from what you said, we distilled it for you to give you a little bit of a leg up on this process so it doesn't take us 6 months to go through every measure. And then we can focus the conversation on the areas where there's really the need to have a discussion. Because in some places, you guys would be amazed how much consensus you have. You are already in agreement, and you'll see when we do the color coding, you'll see what we mean. The dollar amounts, we're not talking budget yet. First, we're going to just talk about what we want in the CERP, and then there will be a separate meeting during that time frame, that work plan process, to go in and reallocate money. Because it doesn't make sense to talk about money if we're not even sure we want to include the measure. So first, it's the measure, and then it's the dollars. So no dollars, no money, just concept and strategy first. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. Any additional ones? We're going to start the process. So I'm going to turn it over to Hannah, because Hannah's going to walk you through. Actually, Kim, can you put up one more slide for us, just so we can see? Let me show you the next one. Let me show you the next slide. This is the 25 measures that we started looking at 2 meetings ago. We started looking at again last meeting, and that we have gone in and sorted preemptively for you based on that large document you guys all have had a chance to look at. We're going to go through now and show you why we gave everything the color ranking that we gave you, and then we're going to work through between now and 6:40, we're going to work through whether or not we made the right assignment. So Hannah's going to spend 10 minutes just talking about how we decided based on what you said, whether it was green, yellow, or red, and then you get to tell us if we were right. And we will first hear the process, take some notes mentally, and then we're going to go back and you're going to tell us if we need to color change anything else. Okay? So this is a sneak peek of what it looks like. And then Hannah's going to walk us through a slightly different document. So while she's getting that up and running, does anybody have questions yet? You agree with most of the green items, Ned? Nice. We love that. We love that. Okay, Hannah's going to spend, we'll see if she can do this, 11 minutes talking through the 25 items and how everyone was assigned what they were assigned. And then at the end of that, we're going to pull up that list again, and you guys are going to free for all tell us yes or no, you're right, you're wrong, this definitely doesn't belong here or there. And if we can finish this all of the sorting in this meeting, we are on track and we can do this by March. So Hannah, 11 minutes, go.
Great, thank you, Erica, and good evening, everyone. So what you're seeing on the screen in terms of text, it's not a new document. You've seen this document, but in the format of 27 pages based on all your comments that you submitted. So what we've done with these comments, we actually sorted them by buckets. Definitely tried to see, are there any concerns about these measures? What additional suggestions do you have about these measures? What are some questions do you have about these measures? What are some potential topics for additional discussions that you asked for? We also looked at just general comments. I like this measure. This is a great program, which we did not include in this document, but just know when we made our assessment based on colors, we did look at those comments. And you're welcome to double check our assumptions. Again, looking at those 27 pages and see if we got it right. So measure number 2, why 2? Because we already talked about measure number 1 and it's going into CERP, you all agreed. Measure number 2, with trees and urban greening, we've seen a lot of support. There's definitely some implementation concerns that, as we mentioned, we will be working through as we pass the CERP. Truck routes, we marked it as yellow. We see some support for this measure, and there's additional suggestions to ensure that this measure focuses around ports and through box tract. So definitely several concerns where how we're going to use this money, who should pay for this. So definitely this measure needs a little bit more discussion. Air filtration in schools. We've seen a lot of support. We've seen a lot of suggestions where to place this air filtrations and how to prioritize this measure. We've seen some concerns which definitely we will account for, but overall some questions that can be answered as we start implementing this measure. But overall we've seen support for this measure. You guys say, and it's highly ranked, that this measure should be part of the CERP. Okay, bike path and infrastructure. You guys actually supporting this measure based on your comments. You want to see this in CERP as long as the projects are focused on connectivity. They do not overlap with other projects that are happening in Stockton. And as long as those projects are based on recent studies. And those are also all great suggestions that are taken into account. And we'll explore all these options once we are in the implementation phase. Trucks, again, we've seen based on your comments and ranking, it's number 6, pretty high. You support this measure and really want to focus on zero emission trucks only. This is a great suggestion. It will be reflected in the description of the measures. Again, all your suggestions, more likely, depending on the suggestions, since it's a high level overview measure, will be reflected in those CERPs. Charging station for electric vehicle. Again, we've seen support for this measure. There's great suggestions to reach out to businesses, assisting to homeowners to make sure they can use this program. But again, some concerns for long-term solutions, all good, valid concerns. Each measure has a little bit of concern, and that's why we're here as a group to hear those concerns and to work through these concerns once the CERP is passed. But again, based on your comments, it's green. Measure number 8, training for electric vehicle mechanics. We've seen a lot of suggestions how this program should be implemented, which is super great. And those suggestions also tell us you guys like this measure. You would like to see that in the CERP. School buses is red. First red. Why red? There are a lot of questions. Is this a good bang for the buck? Since COVID, have priorities shifted? Do we really need this measure? Is this relevant at this point? Large clean fuel infrastructure is green. You know, some confusion about types of fuel, several questions about this measure. So you're not very clear what it is, what it's gonna do. So we placed it in yellow category. It definitely needs more discussion. New electric vehicles, plug-ins. We've seen a lot of supports based on your comments, based on ranking. Definitely suggestions, just for a lot of measures, let's keep it in the AB 617 area. Let's target local investments, overall green. Our red number 12, we did see some recognition for the emission reduction potential. But again, there's been a lot of the comments are saying like who's picking up the bill, who should pay for this. So definitely more discussion is needed on this measure. Number 13, oops, let me zoom out. Trucks and other heavy duty equipment operating at the port. There are some concerns. You guys do recognize opportunity with the strategy and potential emission reduction for the strategy. But again, how the money is going to be spent, who should pay for it, port needs to be involved. Those comments indicate that this measure is in yellow bucket. It still needs discussion. Repair cars to pass smog checks. Again, we see support of this program, some great suggestions. Can we include newer vehicle? Can we host these programs in smaller communities? Some good questions, how effective this program? Can we look at the results of the previous programs? Can we limit it to certain mechanics? Those are all great concerns and suggestions that we can definitely work through. But overall, we see support. And when I say support, I mean this measure should be part of your CERP. Overall, it's green. Okay, car share program, it's yellow. There is a lot of suggestions. What is the best way to collaborate with partners? So definitely needs a little bit more discussion. Tugboats that we've discussed, I believe, a couple meetings ago. We probably need to revisit this discussion because there's a lot still unclear who is responsible for financing, who should be paying for this measure. Next two measures are yellow, replacing wood burning fireplaces. Good concerns. How effective this measure is going to be? Will residents abide by this measure? Will that increase their bills? So a little bit more discussion needed on this measure. Electric bike share program is also in yellow category. You guys like this measure, but I've several comments indicated safety concerns. So probably we want to talk through that a little bit more. Replacing commercial lawn care equipment, some support for this measure, but a lot of you are asking why commercial is prioritized over residential. So definitely we want to spend a little bit more time talking about this measure. Replacing home lawn care equipment, there was actually a mix, and you see we're getting relatively low on the priority list when you guys ranked each measure. So with measure number 20, there was a mix of this measure is a high priority, this measure is a low priority. But again, you prioritize in effectiveness, just like with all other measures, and want to ensure that it stays in the AB 617 area and benefits the residents. So a little bit more discussion needed on this measure. Marine exhaust, just like with several measures related to port, who should pay for it is a big concern. So we definitely want to spend time talking about it, if this measure should be part of the CERP, if AB 617 should cover it. Next two measures are in green. Even though they're relatively low on your priority list, they got a lot of support, especially air filtration in homes. Excellent comments if you haven't had a chance to check the larger document. You guys want to make sure we definitely benefit vulnerable population living to those pollution sources, and it needs to be data-driven approach, but definitely air filtration is in home. It's a yes measure. It should be part of the CERP, as well as home weatherization and electrification. One of the suggestions were, how can we focus on solar rooftops more? And again, ensure that funding should benefit AB 617 residents and community. And finally, two new measures, which you haven't had a chance to comment, are truck idling plugins and parklets, pockets, parks, traffic calming measures, two measures that we definitely need to spend time discussing and understanding what it means. Did I make my time?
You did. You have a minute to spare, Hannah. You did awesome. You overviewed, I think, really, really well. And this is a reflection of all the comments that were in that 25-page document. We were wrangling to pull it all together today to get it kind of in a place that was a little bit easier to digest, because 30 pages is a lot for anyone to read. And so we wanted to do a little of the heavy lifting for you. And we wanted to take time today for you to tell us if we got it right, based on what you kind of felt like. Most of you had a chance to provide your feedback in writing or verbally. Some of you might have either changed your mind or maybe want to have some conversation about that. So today is a good time for us to say, let's decide which ones we really want to talk a lot about, yellow and red, and which ones we go, no, Air District, put those in the CERP at the high level, and then we'll go in and talk implementation specifics during the implementation phase. So this is a chance for us to work concurrently to kind of move the needle. I am going to, let's see. Oh, Jamie has emailed the current version, I think. I don't know if she's got it or not, actually.
It'll be coming from
Heather. Okay, perfect. Perfect. Heather will be emailing this version that Hannah just showed, but we want to change these colors today. We want you to tell us if we got it right. What we wanted to do as your facilitators is help get you farther along the process and help kind of do some of the heavy lifting for you, because we know that between Thanksgiving and holidays and stay at home, and some of you are probably distance learning your kids, you may not have had the time to get this done. So how can we kind of help you move this forward, given how much other things you might have on your plate? So we may not have gotten it all right, and now's a chance for you to tell us what we need to modify, how we need to adjust. So what I am going to do is I'm actually going to share my screen, and Kim doesn't know this yet, but I'm going to share my screen, and then we are going to talk about each one of the measures. We're going to show them to you as we have coded them in red, yellow, green, and we're going to give you a chance to go through and say, yeah, this is kind of right, or this is not. And again, you've had a few weeks to look at this. This is all the same information that was in that very large document, but it's just a chance for you to weigh your concerns. And the green means, yeah, we want this in our CERP. And even if we have to do some wordsmithing, we want it in the CERP. Yellow and red mean not really sure, and we need to talk more. And that's what we'll spend the next 2 meetings on, is that how we break out the discussion time so that we have enough time to discuss the things you want to talk about. So give me 1 second.
Erica, just to emphasize real quick, the document that you just saw on the screen, it's like literally copy paste from the 27 pages of your comments. Some of the comments are summarized because they've been mentioned several times, but most of the bullet points are literally copy paste. If you compare, you will see that. So it's not a brand new document, it's just distilled a little bit more.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to begin the process of talking through and making in real time some changes to the document as it needs to be made. So actually, yeah, let me do this now. Let me pull these here. So we've got 2 versions we can look at. The first version shows it all the incentive strategies in order. In the color coding version that Hannah just showed, this is how they all came out. You've got greens, yellows, reds, and then the 2 new ones we put in at the yellow category. If you wanted to see it by number, this is how it looks. We've got 11 in the green, 10 in the yellow, and 4 in the red. And that might help you think about how much time we need to talk about each one, right? So the yellows and reds are going to take a little bit more time to discuss. The greens, we're always going to talk about during implementation, but we feel comfortable that the Air District can start that wordsmithing process. We feel like those are the ones that definitely are going in our CERP, and they're going to look a certain way, but they're going to go in. So why don't I ask Hannah to be kind of the facilitator on the blue hands, if you wouldn't mind. If we've got blue hands or comments that you want to have people weigh in on, we can go in and move things around. We can move vegetative barriers to red if you feel like it needs to go to red, or we can start going in to one of these and really rethinking what the color coding is. So in general, how How do you feel about the assignments? Were there some glaring things that you think need to be adjusted or questions that you have?
We have a hand from Debbie.
I put some comments in the comment section, the chat section, but I had some comments on 1 and 2, but it sounds like we are still going to talk about them to where, because I had suggested that not only do we want to have barriers, but we should put it out to the public for trees on in particular area 617 that we've identified for trees to be put in like their yard, their front yard or something, with some kind of contract that they'll take care of them. I didn't see any of that in there. So that was the only comment that I had on that, that I don't know if we have to say that now, but everything else looks great.
Thank you.
Like
that's a really good point.
You put a lot of thought into it.
And Debbie, I'm making note of the within the vegetative barrier, part of that process would be to further investigate and ask the public about locations and other areas. And that definitely can be part of that process and listed within that language.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Debbie.
Thank you.
Any other things that you have questions about, or things that you're like, this doesn't fit here? This doesn't really, we've got a yellow where we should have a red, or a red where we should have a green. Anything that needs to be adjusted, moved?
Matt, I see a hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to keep up with the chat. I just wanted to respond to Debbie's comments about trees can be anywhere, and urban greening can be a generalized strategy, but a vegetated barrier is a concentrated planting of hedges and tall trees in a specific place to act as a biofilter. So that's the kind of thing that can be designed rather scientifically, depending on right of access, versus more generic urban greening and forestry projects. So just a definition there. And then I want to make sure that the green trucks in here, that we understand what kind of trucks we're talking about. These are kind of like the local trucks. We're not sinking our money into long haul trucks, because if this includes long haul trucks, then I'm going to ask to push it at least to yellow, if not out.
The committee's actually said it's zero. They want to focus on zero emission technology. So if Tesla can turn their magic wheel around and then we get a zero emission long haul truck, I think that's something that this community might be open to, but zero emission technology is what the community has put as their priority.
Okay, so we're talking about local trucks.
Yeah, and then the other thing, Matt, too, would also be, no matter what we're looking at, there would have to be a direct tie. The majority of the use would have to be in these communities, or substantial enough that we could calculate emission reductions as a result of those funds for something like that. It's not just they only travel like 5 miles once a month in the community, that they could somehow get funding for that.
Yeah, that's the Fed's problem, the long ones. So thank you.
The other thing I'll make a note of is that there's another trucks discussion in the yellow bucket, which is the heavy duty equipment at the port. So there's 2 different categories there. One of them is green, where we had consensus, and the other one gets a lot of conversation, I think, that we've had when we bring up port discussions.
There's a question in the comments about car sharing, and I had sent out there was a grant proposal. There's been 2 grant proposals. One's a grant proposal by the COG, which got, hold on, I gotta pull it up. COG, which got approved. That was a STEP grant proposal that does include some car share funding, but this car share funding would expand it and would help bring down the cost for like an hour car rental. So Right now they have it down to where it might be $10 for an hour. If we came in, we could maybe get it down to $5 for an hour. The other thing is that there was another grant that was a grant that was through the San Joaquin County Housing Authority that was only car sharing, and they did not get that grant. So one of the ideas was for this group, and that was the little one pager that was sent out before the last meeting, detailed what that grant with the Housing Authority would have done and how AB 617 money could possibly come in and do it. But it basically would set up electric vehicles in Conway Homes, Boggs Track, Sierra Vista, or whatever area that the steering committee decided that was within the community. Electric vehicles, you then are a member of that community. You can reserve that vehicle on a Saturday from 8 to noon to go and do your grocery shopping, to go to a doctor's appointment, to whatever you need to do. And it's going to be a much reduced cost, just dollars, for you to be able to basically rent that car. So there was another question about why don't we just let the market do this? The free market for these types of car sharing programs in like a San Francisco for like a zip car, it can be upwards of $30 an hour. This you could get possibly 6 hours for $30. So it's really about bringing that cost down to something that folks can afford. There was a couple of questions about that. And so I just wanted to clarify that and point people back to that little one pager that we sent out. And I believe we'll put it on the website if it's not there, about what this car sharing program would look like.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamie.
Margot, we saw your hand. Let us circle back to in just a moment. Erica, meanwhile, I've been monitoring chat, and the process of confirming color codes. The chat is great, but it's also hard to keep a track of. But what we're seeing in the chat right now, since we want to move some measures around, definitely support for barriers in urban greening, vegetative barriers to remain green. Suggestions for truck routes to turn from yellow into green. And number 10.
This one here to go to green?
Yes, that's what I'm seeing in the chat. And also measure number 10, there's several suggestions in the chat for it to go green.
And
on this one, parklet?
Yep, to piggyback on pocket parks and traffic calming measures, the reason that was green is there hadn't really been much of a discussion about this outside of that comment question, or that comment process that you all have done the 2 rounds of now. So we hadn't really talked about this in a meeting, but it does sound like there is great support for it. So I think it can be moved over to the green side.
Cool.
Okay, Margot, you had your hand up, and then Mariah.
Yeah, I just so I heard mentioned solar for residents, but I'm not sure where that fits in this chart. If it's under the home weatherization and electrification, is it in there?
It is, Margot, and it's actually in some of the draft language that we have. Technically, it's home weatherization, solar, and electrification, and we are doing. I will say that we kind of put air filtration, home weatherization, and solar and electrification. We're looking at maybe putting that into one large strategy, kind of about resources for you in your home to make your indoor air quality better.
Great.
Erica,
any other moves that you see?
Yeah, Mariah and Catherine, we're gonna get to you, but let's clarify truck routes are green, and that was measure number 3. I guess I see what's happening. I see what's happening in the numbers, Erica. With this boxes, all the measures are not numbered based on priority.
They're not numbered. Yeah, it's not the same original numbers. What it is just to show you how many are in each bucket, so we know how much time we might need to take to talk about those buckets. So we can go back to this one if you want to see the numbers. That's the original order. That was the prioritization order that you all identified a couple meetings back. So we can use this one too, and we can go in and say move to green, move to red if this is an easier document for you. No, Amy's going no. This one's better. Okay, we'll stick with this one, but just know that the numbers are shifted. We struggled with that a little. Sorry to confuse you, but we wanted you to see how many were in each bucket so you knew how much time it would take to cover each bucket for you.
Okay, great. Then Erica, can you please fix in yellow box measure number 3, remove green, yep, and put it to measure number 1, truck routes.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I gotcha.
Thank you guys for catching that in the chat box. Okay, so we're gonna go to Mariah, then Catherine, and then Ed. You guys have your hands up.
Hi, that I was just going to point that out. So thank you for for changing that. That was my only comment.
Thank you. Catherine?
Same thing. I just didn't want to cut off Erica as you all were moving through that. Thanks.
That's why.
Thank you for that. We need your eyes. We need those eyes. Thank you.
Yes. Ed?
I just had a question regarding, we have a date, November 4th, and what that date, I believe, represents is CARB's position on the omnibus bill. No?
No.
Can
no.
You understand better?
Yeah, that actually was when we began this conversation. Well, November 4th actually flags when we started this conversation. And so on November 4th, we already talked about vegetative barriers and we talked a bit about trucks at the port. And so those are why those two are bolded and that date is flagged. I'll let the Air District speak to the CARB discussion there.
Okay, thank you.
For CARB. I'm not sure about the another piece on November 4th or you said something about an omnibus package?
Well, yeah, the CARB board passed an omnibus package that requires quite a bit of changes at the ports. And I don't want to reinvent the wheel here. I think we need to have a pretty good understanding of what operating businesses at the port are going to be required to do moving forward, and then use our monies to supplement, not supplant that action moving forward. So
that's a really good point.
This is Todd from the Air District, and I'll certainly, if there's a CARB representative that can speak to the omnibus regulation directly, they certainly can. But generally speaking, what we do with our incentives and the idea here would be is you are accelerating turnover. You want to do it faster than the regulations and get more immediate emission reductions and health benefits than what the regulations might otherwise get you. And I you know, the omnibus regulation definitely has deadlines and actions that businesses need to take. What we do is we accelerate that by a significant number of years and get those benefits early. That's one of the main tenets of most of our grant programs, is getting early and extra reductions before they're required by a regulation. So just generally speaking, and again, somebody from CARB, if they can speak to the omnibus regulation specifically, that's fine. But generally speaking, our incentives get, you know, what could be a truck replaced, you know, 10 years earlier than the requirement in the regulation would otherwise dictate.
Perfect, thank you. I stopped share just in case someone from CARB wanted to weigh in as well.
Hi there, this is Scott Wall with the California Air Resources Board. One of the questions I saw in chat from Jonathan, what is the definition of omnibus? It's basically the omnibus regulation is adding several kind of different layers of regulatory measures to the heavy duty regulations. And so it's pretty complex. So what I will do is I can post a fact sheet for the heavy duty omnibus. It's about 3 or 4 pages into the chat. Folks want to kind of link to it and take a look at it. That will kind of give you a good little summary of what is all included in the omnibus regulation. So I don't have it memorized enough to speak to it in depth, but I can certainly link a fact sheet into the chat for you.
Thank you, Scott. I do see Matt's hand.
Yeah, can you put the screen back up, please? There's two things
Absolutely.
that are separated and they're not different things. So urban greening and urban forestry, along with parklets and traffic calming measures, those are all urban greening. And I think it's important to connect them because I've been planting trees for a really long time. And the biggest problem I have isn't funding trees or watering them. It's that poor neighborhoods got terrible sidewalks and they're covered in concrete and asphalt. And so the planning for urban greening is going to cost as much as the urban greening itself. So I think like the traffic calming measure starts to get at the gray infrastructure problems. So, you know, I mean, I like that we're calling out specific measures, but if you're doing urban greening, you've got to do things like complete streets, which is, you know, a model now that involves walkability, big sidewalk buckets, so trees stay alive. I know we're moving them both into green, but I want to make sure everybody understands that urban greening is engineering, planning, and concrete removal before anybody ever sticks a tree in the ground. And so that's a big ticket item. And I don't know, they're all together, but pocket parks.
Well, and that's a good point, and maybe the Air District can speak to, or other committee members can speak to why they were separated. But I do know that each one of these items, as individual items, will have a budget allocation for them. So if we wanted to prioritize them and really make sure that certain elements stood out, separating them might accomplish that. But I definitely want to hear from the Air District or from those that recommended those individual measures as opposed to consolidating them as to why that was done. Because I do, complete streets, as you said, it's a best practice. People are starting to do that quite a bit now, and it's important to think through those. They are very pricey though, right? So when we have that budget conversation, it'll be important to really allocate appropriately so that the work can get done.
I'd like to speak to that real quickly because I was one of the ones that recommended that off the bat. On something like that, what I was thinking of is that you have a contract with people. They have to bring you a photo of their front yard with their address to make sure that they can have something like a tree in their front yard. You know, that's just what I was thinking.
Like an adopt a tree program with a community agreement.
Ryan?
That's kind of something like that, but it would be for a person's own individual yard.
Right. No, I feel that. Those are great programs, but eventually we're going to have to crack all the sidewalks and the streetscapes if we're going to.
Well, I think Debbie have a good, a valid point for just not just an organization itself benefited, but as well as residential have the willing to want to have trees in their own houses for ownership as well. That's what I.
Yeah, I prefer private trees. Private homeowners take better care of their trees than cities ever have. But cities own most of the land. And so, you know, the footprint is toxic. So yes to all of the above. And adopt a tree programs automatically skewed towards wealthier neighborhoods. You know, the whole idea falls into the whole category of inequality. So I ran one really poorly for a long time, but I still think they're a good idea.
I think if you design it properly, I don't think it has to work like that. But, you know, that's something we could talk about. That's something we need to talk about, I guess.
Well, and just to clarify, the greens are still going to be discussed during implementation. They're just something that we want to make sure is in the CERP. So what you're telling us right now is that everything in the green box, including parklets, pocket parks, traffic calming measures, we want those in the CERP. The next draft that you guys look at, they're going to be in there. And then certainly the specific tactical implementation, how we execute, will be built in after we approve the CERP.
Erica, Ryan had his hand up and then we had, go ahead.
So real quick, Matt, kind of the concept of why that was kind of separate right now. a lot of it has to do with who we think may be partner agencies in this. We definitely see that as working with more with the cities, counties on that type of measure. Whereas like vegetative barriers, trees and urban greening, we see like Puentes or Families First as being like the main point of context, working with them on the actual planting. So that's why we had those separated out.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Cool. And then Hannah, you had somebody else had a hand up as well?
Yes, Yanda?
Yeah, I was just actually going to, thank you, Ryan. I was going to comment on the same thing back to Matt and Debbie, is that, yeah, we've been doing a lot of the individual planting throughout Stockton here recently, and we have found strategies to kind of help people take some accountability for that on their own site. But Matt, you're absolutely right. Yes, the city has the most space, and that is where it is the most difficult. So, but Debbie, to your point, yes, we absolutely have a strategy for that we can utilize.
That's awesome. Okay, and I can't see the hands. Hannah, are there any more hands up before we continue?
Yes, so I have a hand from Douglas.
Yes, thank you. I'm more supporting green space as far as my concern of that, because I believe Stockton is supposed to be the city of the tree. And I noted that on the list, they, I was trying to find buy a electrical bike. And I Googled it, and you guys used to have those incentives where you have a program where I could go to, go to work or go to City Hall or go to a downtown area with an electrical bike, but I want to buy them. Like I think they cost like $1,750, but and somehow there's some company that will accept incentive. Did you have that particular program in Fresno? Anyone?
We don't currently have a bike sharing program. There have been versions of those started in a lot of different cities with varying degrees of success. I think obviously some of the larger cities, San Francisco has a very robust bike sharing program. But it's certainly a possibility. We don't currently operate one here in the district.
And Fresno had a very briefly had a bike sharing program, but it was years ago and all the bikes got stolen and they didn't have any way to track them.
Now there have been significant advances. There's tracking now, and I think it requires some sort of either credit card to release them from their locks or something like that, and then there's a per hour charge, and you return it to another locking kiosk or something like that. So the technology's certainly come a long way.
Okay, great, thank you.
Awesome.
Erica,
all right, so I want to link. Oh, perfect. I think she said we don't have any more hands. I appreciate that, Hannah. I see the chat still going, which we appreciate. And those that can answer the questions in the chat, please do. I do want to circle us back, though, to this color coding. And in part because we're so close, I feel like you guys have already given basic feedback on things that should be moved from box to box to box. So we've got some things moved into green, which are amazing, because then the Air District can start working on the strategies and refining and wordsmithing the strategies high level based on your feedback in the green boxes. The yellow and red boxes, we're going to structure agendas for the next couple meetings to just talk about them. We're going to figure out how to discuss them, how to make sure we work through the kinks. We'll spend a little more time on red than we do on yellow. And what we envision is that we'll do this process for these 25. And then what you haven't seen and we haven't talked about is the other set of 25. So we're going to do the same process for the next set of 25. And that's a different category of incentives. It's the implementation category, correct? Jamie, just talk me through, since we don't see it right now. Jamie, can you talk us through what's that second tab of the Excel doc from way back that's got the other strategies?
Enforcement.
The measures.
The
enforcement
is what we've called it coordination implementation strategy. So these are that don't require a big check. To put it bluntly, most of them are not buying big things. They're not buying cars. They're not repairing cars. They're not buying filtration systems. They're not, they're not buying things. They're usually staff time, in all honesty. Staff time, outreach, enforcement, regulatory work. They're those things that really are huge priorities of the AB 617 program, but they're less defined by a dollar amount, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that helps. So this is the first bucket, and there's another bucket which is not so much about budget, but is also important that we'll be discussing as well in a future meeting. So this process of sorting will be important for those as well, in case we need to have longer discussions about certain elements that you want to talk through. So we want to cue that up for you just mentally so you can be prepared for that. We'll certainly agendize it appropriately, but we wanted you to get a sense of knowing that this is only 50% of the measures or the strategies. There's another set of strategies we haven't talked about yet. I can't see hands. Are there any other moves we want to make, guys? How are we feeling like this is the magic list? We've got 2 greens being added, truck routes and parklets being moved to green. Does anything else need to be moved from one section to another?
And Erica, maybe it will be helpful to zoom in just a little bit on your PowerPoint so we can read it a little bit better.
And I see Matt's hand. Let me make sure I can.
And Margot's hand is up as well.
Cool.
Yeah, there's a few on the yellow box. I wasn't sure how this was progressing. I think, I'm really interested in the residents, and I'm wondering why the home lawn care equipment is in the yellow box, as well as the wood burning fireplace. I know there might be a hesitancy on some residents' efforts, but I think those are really important things that really affect the air.
And I can speak.
You feel like they belong in green?
There's an easy answer on why we wanted to have just a tiny little bit more conversation about the home lawn care equipment. There were some questions about, first of all, why do they get less than the commercial guys? The answer to that is that with the home lawn care equipment, it's you going to Lowe's and buying a trimmer that's maybe $50 and getting a rebate for that. Whereas when you go and buy, and it's usually electric trimmer that you can either plug into your house or you have a little battery for that you charge and it runs for 30 minutes or something. With the commercial equipment, it is much more expensive equipment. It's equipment that usually has to run for, maybe 6, 8, 10 hours at a time. It is not something you can go at Home Depot and purchase, and it's kind of a whole different category. So instead of the normal retail price being maybe $50, the normal retail price might be $500. So the percentage that this program would pay for residential would be more than it would pay for commercial, but the dollar amount might be more for commercial because the commercial equipment just is in operation longer. It's a heavier piece of equipment and it's in operation longer. So we just wanted to clarify that with folks, make sure that they were okay with that. In some cases, we're even in Chapter have offered, if folks are turning in an old lawnmower, if they've got a gas powered lawnmower, we're paying 100% of the new lawnmower if they're turning in a gas powered one and buying an electric one. So we just wanted to clarify that, see if there were questions or comments about that. With regard to wood stoves, there has been some conversations in the comments about whether or not having an incentive for people to go from wood to gas is something that they want to do. And everyone has very unique opinions about that. Some people think, yep, wood to gas is good. There is an emission gain, but gas does still produce emissions. So that one maybe needs to have a little more discussion. The home lawn care, we just needed to clarify a little bit with everyone and make sure everyone fully understood what that meant and why the dollar amount may have seemed not very much. It's just because that equipment's usually less expensive.
Douglas, we see your hand, but I just want to give a shout out to Jamie because she literally remembers all your comments and questions from 27-page document by heart. And
I spent a lot of time with your comments.
Hey, real quick there was one other thing on the residential home lawn care. I think there were some questions about what was the real benefit, you know, in the emission reductions. And I know Todd, who's over our incentive program, has a much better understanding, and you could probably talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, certainly, Ryan. And yeah, I think the residential and commercial actually lawn care programs are one of the few programs at the district that really targets neighborhoods. These pieces of equipment are running in your front yard, in your backyard, in your neighbor's yards, at your schools, at your daycare facilities, up and down the median strips of you know, the roads that you drive on. So the emission reductions and the benefits are super highly localized. And when you're talking about replacing gas-powered equipment, this is not, you know, well-controlled gas-powered equipment that, you know, in general has, you know, a catalytic converter, you know, and so these are, even the newer pieces of equipment are fairly dirty when you're talking about combustion equipment. And so by eliminating those and going to electric, you know, there's a huge benefit in terms of exposure reduction and overall emission benefits. And it really, again, it's targeted in the neighborhoods and by the schools and by the, you know, the sensitive receptors that we're really concerned about. So, you know, we see a huge benefit in replacing lawn and garden equipment. And it's, you know, it's really been one of our very popular programs in the recent years.
So what I'm hearing, if I'm hearing you correctly, Todd, and then Ryan, and then even others from the CSC, do we want to move, based on this 5-minute conversation, the lawn care to green?
I have a question.
Douglas.
I kind of disagree with Todd regarding the electrical motor because they have a problem. I used to trade in my gas motor, a powerful one that turn and it go by itself and cut all the heavy dip without being stopped. With electrical, it stopped every 5 minutes. Whether the grass was wet, it gets stuck. Whether the grass is dry, whether the smoke, I get allergy from the grass, you know, from the air, it pollinates all over the place. So basically, it doesn't have enough power to cut not even a half of your lawn grass. It's just like quarter it. Then you have, and also the blade is not that efficient. It's not even sharp enough to cut the grass. So it stop and go and stop. And that, to me, that's one of the biggest flaws right there. If to improve I wouldn't mind having electric lawn again if they improve the power of the lawn that cut better, longer than keep stopping every section on the way. It's really tiresome. So I understand where that's coming from, and I do believe that it's practical, but the lawnmower I have had electrical before have not been very efficient and adequate when I have experience.
Yeah, no, Douglas, that's a great point. And I think that's been the experience of a lot of early adopters of the technology. Folks, you know, even 3, 4, 5 years ago, folks that purchased this equipment, that's a lot of the feedback that we got as well. What we have found through the program over the last probably 2 to 3 years is there's been a huge increase in not only the number of manufacturers of this equipment, but the power, battery storage has increased. And so what we're seeing right now is that a lot of these units are very much on par with what you would find in terms of power and runtime with a gas unit. Obviously, you know, you still have to charge the battery. So, you know, if you have a huge yard, it may or may not work for you. But what we've seen over the last couple of years is there has been a dramatic increase in efficiency of these units. Storage capacity, battery storage capacity is getting better and better every year. And just the technology itself is improving. But you're 100% right. The early versions of the electric lawnmowers were not very practical for somebody, other than just ideal conditions, very small yards. You're 100% correct. I think we have seen some growth in that industry, and just the sheer number of manufacturers out there that are producing some pretty high quality equipment these days.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm seeing comments that validate this, both in the chat and verbally. And so what I am doing right now, unless someone has a huge objection to it, is moving these two, commercial and home lawn care equipment, to green. And the caveat that I think we're hearing, though, is that it's important for the technology to reflect what the expectations are for the equipment, so that it's got to be, that hopefully, and I don't know if it can be written into the measure, but that the equipment is comparable or as close to comparable as possible to the current gas versions. And that's certainly something that I think everyone would want, based on the experiences that they've had from the early adoption standpoint. Any major objections to moving those guys to green? I don't see any. Hannah, I'm trusting you on the hands.
We do have a hand from Matt, but that was before you asked about objections.
Okay. I'm also seeing some comments on bike share, so I want us to take Matt's comment and then acknowledge the bike share and whether there's a move of the bike share to a different color, but we're doing really well on time. I want to give us 3 or 4 more minutes on this sorting exercise before we close into the transition to the deadline extension. Matt.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, my comments have evolved as I've heard all of these other comments. So I wasn't sure if I heard Jamie clearly about the wood burning replacement stoves and inserts. I wasn't sure if there was already a funding program for that out here or not. I'm not familiar, but just in the habit of finding any existing program not being funded by this. So should I?
There is a program existing. The currently it only pays, depending, about $1,000 for your new unit. This would increase that. The idea was to increase this dollar amount, so it would pay closer to 100% of your new unit.
Copy that. Thank you. And then I was going to do something that I know I shouldn't do, because bicycle people, I love you. I am not one of you. You might not be able to tell from my video camera, but fitness is not a habit of mine. And so I don't know enough about cycling in Stockton. So I wanted to ask the committee, and clearly they're in favor of bike share. But I'm of the opinion that Stockton doesn't have the infrastructure in place for a safe cycling community, and that there's a world of planning and re-engineering that needs to go into place. So, I don't know if there are places where bike share can be used safely and sustainably, and that this might be something that needs to wait for other funding sources. And I have seen cities really gouge these companies to bring in their bike shares, where they're paying to set it up and they're offering discounts to low-income residents. And so I love bikes. I love bike share. Please don't hate me. I also think there are other ways to fund it, and everything we move into green pulls away from really the green infrastructure that never takes a day off. That's my only 2 cents. So I wouldn't argue to push it into red, because I'm scared of cyclists. But I don't know about the fitness here, and so I want to bring that up.
Thank you for that. And that's part of the reason I think that it's in yellow, is for us to have that conversation and really clarify, whether the infrastructure is there, whether the money is well spent. So those are really, really good points. And I'm seeing some validation of that in the chat. As it relates to the question from Albert, he's asking about green number 5, and there's trucks there. And is that going to address port or truck idling? And I think those are different measures.
Right. So I just responded. So green number 5 right now is just taking and the example I'm giving is a bad one, because UPS already has clean trucks, but think about the local delivery trucks. There may be delivering linens. There may be delivering sodas. There may be delivering anything around the community. to replace those trucks with zero emission vehicles. And that's a replacement. It's not really about idling. And then idling, what, Ryan?
No, real quick. I think it potentially could be people that deliver things to the port may qualify. But the trucks and other equipment, that really is like port-owned, operated equipment that could be incentivized to replace that with electric types of equipment or other clean fuels. But that's kind of where the distinction would be, where one set we're talking about equipment not owned by the port, and the other set owned by the port.
And the truck idling plugins that is in yellow number 9, that is setting up basically a place for those trucks. It's usually refrigerated trucks where they can plug themselves in so they can then turn off their engine and allow their refrigerator unit to keep running. So they pull into a parking spot, they plug their truck in, and that refrigerator unit can keep running. When we're talking about just enforcing the existing no idling rules, those will be brought up when we get to that second bucket of collaboration items that's coming down the road.
Got it. Okay, we are at time. I think we have sorted, and you guys did a great job. We have moved 4 additional yellows into green, which means we will have 6 yellows and 4 reds to talk about and spend a little more time discussing, having this kind of dialogue and really getting a little honed in on what your priorities are and where we want to land in the final CERP. Last chance, speak now or forever hold your peace on the sorting, because we're going to take this assignment and build out our agenda for the next couple of meetings to meet our timelines. So I'm going to leave this up for 5 more seconds and then let everyone say, and we'll read the chat too to make sure that this is all reflective, but last chance to make any more moves, any more shifts, any more resource.
Erica, we have 2 hands from Mary and Margot, and Ryan, your hand is also up.
Yes, it is. The only thing I was going to share was on the electric bike share. That if the steering committee still wants to look at that, what we could do is we could include it. We could place a lower priority on it. Let other measures like the bicycle infrastructure kind of build up, and then look to maybe launch a car share later on the program, as opposed to like right out the gate. But that's just a thought.
Margot?
Yeah, I'd just like to talk about the truck idling plugins, because I think that's a really important focus. I think it should be green at the same time. Perhaps there's other programs that handle that concept, and if we could find a way just to encourage that to start taking place, because truck idling seemed to be a huge issue for neighborhoods.
Well, and something to think about, anything yellow can always be moved to green in the next discussion. Yellow just means we're going to talk about it. So it doesn't mean it won't go in the CERP. It just means that it maybe deserves a different discussion. So we can absolutely move it to green if the group's feeling strongly about it. But if there's others that want to talk about it a little more, it's in yellow for that purpose now. I don't see any comments or hands.
There's one more hand from Mary.
Okay.
Mary Elizabeth.
One about the electric bikes, and we do not have the infrastructure for healthy bike riding with just using, our own mass and energy, human energy. And the main thing is that we have such a problem on illegal bicycling. And I'm not kidding you, just this week, I saw on Pacific Avenue an electric bike fly right through a stop sign while there was somebody in the walkway, the crosswalk. And, you know, it's incredibly dangerous, and I would definitely not be in favor of spending any money on electric bikes at this time.
Thanks for that, Mary.
And we kept it in with bicycle planning.
And the chat reflects that there is still a lot of interest in having the conversation. And I think it is a debate, right? Whether the infrastructure is there, whether the money's well spent, definitely at least worthy of a yellow and maybe even a red, depending on where we think we might land. And maybe that's the assignment for bikes. Not that it doesn't belong in the CERP, but that there's just a lot of discussion that needs to still have around the bike conversation. And we certainly want to be respectful of that. So what we know, and I stopped the share so we can stay on track and get you guys out of here by 7. What we know is that we have added some things to the green, which is amazing. So everything that's in the green bucket, we're going to send off to the Air District. They're going to do their wordsmithing magic and come back with some draft CERP recommendations that match the strategy samples that they've already shown you from other communities. For the reds and the yellows, we're going to try and craft an agenda for a future meeting very soon that gives us time to talk through some of these key issues and really flag some of the big things that you guys have said is important to discuss as a group. So that's how we're going to take this next set. And you did manage to get the sorting exercise complete with time to spare. And so the good news is, based on the agenda, we have to talk about the extension letter for CARB. And I think based on the progress we made today, we're on track there. But I want to move it to Ryan to talk about how that extension letter gets done, where we go from here, and where we move in the next stage of this process, specifically related to the measures and the CERP development. You're on mute. There you go.
Thank you. Yes, thanks, Erica. So did want to talk about the extension. It's been brought up several times by many of the steering committee members. You know, there is some issues with you know, there is a state law that basically requires us to have this completed by 12 months after the community was selected, which was in December of 2019, meaning that we'd have to, the district would have to have the plan approved by December of this year. Now, understanding where we're at, we understand based on some guidance that CARB put out, that there is an opportunity to potentially extend that deadline. Now, obviously, we still have concerns with the possibility that, you know, that deals with that statutory deadline. You know, we do have CARB on the meeting, and you know, understanding, you know, what their thoughts are about extensions, and because we could submit this, and if at the end of the day, if CARB doesn't approve it, then you know, we're basically violating state law, which is a big issue. And so what we need to be mindful of through this process is that the extension that we're asking for, we look to keep it as much as possible to, you know, minimize that time. And so Erica was kind enough to share with you the outline that is in the letter, and I will share that. So basically, you know, what we've put together is just kind of an outline. I shared with the group, I think last time, the guidance that CARB had put out about extensions, and there were some requests that the district provide information if we were going to do this. And so the kind of the elements that we put together was just explaining at a high level, you know, where we're at with this process, kind of explaining that the expected timeline that we've presented to you tonight would be that we would take it to our board by March 18th of 2021. And then, you know, kind of going through all the different things that we've worked so hard on, you know, giving that background to them, as well as the list of the different measures that have been proposed. That's another item that will go along with this. And then a general discussion about, you know, the next steps that we're going to be taking, kind of planned out, which that's what Erica talked about. And then lastly, what the plan is. We would look to take it in March of 2021 and then forward that on to CARB. I think it would be good, since we have CARB on the line, to talk about those concerns that we have about the statutory deadlines and what impacts that may mean. So I don't know if Scott can speak to that.
Hey, Ryan. Oh, there you go. Stop share. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Ryan. I was a little bit distracted with a side chat here. Can you rephrase what you're looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just sharing, because at the end of the day, this is by not meeting the 12 months, that's a statutory violation. I mean, not a violation, but it's not meeting the law, which says that 12 months after community selection, that the committee has to, that the district has to present a completed CERP. Now, we've understand that there's been discussions at CARB, other communities have come to you and asking what it looks like to request to extend. But at the end of the day, it is a decision by CARB to allow for those extensions. And so wanting to hear CARB's perspective on the, extending that to a March period.
Sure, okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Everything I've heard so far is that if you submit the letter, can be as casual as an email, and that you have the community steering committee buy-in and the Air District buy-in on the request to extend it, and you kind of meet all of the requests that are in the letter that I've shared out with the committee a couple of times now, and that you've actually, I think, got incorporated in your draft letter there, that there really would be no problem approving the extension of the time. So I don't see that I don't see any roadblocks to it being approved, I guess, at this point, assuming you are able to adequately answer the 6 or 7 questions that are in that letter.
I pulled them up, Scott, if it helps, I can read them off. All elements of a community emissions reduction program that have already been adopted by the Air District Board. Oh, I'm sorry. So above it, if the district has not adopted a complete program that meets the blueprint requirements by that deadline, the steering committee and the Air District provide CARB with the following by December 1st, which I think Karen's on the line, so she can weigh in better if like December something qualifies as December 1st. But there's basically 7 things that Scott mentioned. All elements of a community emissions reduction program that have already been adopted by the Air District Board, if any, the anticipated date that the local board will consider approval of a complete community emissions reduction program, which is your March date, a summary of decisions the steering committee and district staff have made to date and topics the steering committee has discussed, a listing of emission reduction actions the steering committee and district staff have agreed on, and a listing of the actions still under discussion, including, to the extent available, emission reduction targets, implementation schedule, and enforcement plan. It's kind of like what the roadmap is. Initial community air monitoring priorities and any air monitoring that has been deployed, if applicable. Ah, good, you got it. And then, yes, 6 and 7, an overview of ongoing and planned community engagement efforts and a summary of the next steps, including measurable interim milestones to track progress and a clear schedule for finalizing the emission reduction program and the camp.
And I think too that this, and I'm happy to show it again, but the list of meetings that speak to kind of where we would go from today through March in advance of that Air District Board meeting, and kind of the roadmap to the CERP development and finalization is that plan, right? And I think today is an indication that we were able to accomplish a big chunk of the step 1. And that if we stay on track, that the March timeframe that is being proposed by the Air District seems reasonable, and that we should be in good shape to meet the deadline, the extended deadline that we're proposing. Is that accurate, Ryan?
Yeah, that is. And so just to let everybody know the contents of that, basically what we did was we took the information that was in the agendas, the information that was covered. We included that. That was basically the summary of the work that the steering committee has done. And then as far as the individual measures, we basically took the measures that were proposed, prioritized, and presented that as an attachment to the other work. And then we discussed what we've done so far working with. We presented the draft copy of a camp to the steering committee. And then talked about what the next steps for that are going to be. And that's basically the information that is included in that, along with the outline of the next meeting dates or proposed dates. That's really the contents of that letter.
Yeah. Okay. So what do you need from the CSC to move this extension request forward? Anything at all, or is it notification requirement only?
I'm sorry, what was I missed that?
Oh, saying what do you need from the CSC as it relates to this extension letter? Do you need an approval, or is it just notification that, are you guys still there? Oh, yeah, I think I lost my, yeah, I think I lost my internet, but I can still talk to you. What is it that you need from the CSC?
I think we just need consensus on that we want to send this letter to CARB with the time frame of looking for completed CERP in March.
Perfect. Hannah, I have lost my internet connection. I can still talk on the phone, but can you get a general consensus from the CSC that they're comfortable with this extension of with a March deadline?
And just to answer one of the questions in the chat right now, there is flexibility in those additional steering committee meetings. We put some tentative dates, but we will be doing doodle polls to hone in on the extra meetings. The standing monthly meeting will still happen, but those extra meetings, we'll send out some suggestions for folks.
Thank you for that.
Great. So we see the comment from Stacy that yes to extension. Can we get a sense from the rest of the committee by doing your thumbs up, using your reactions? Okay. I see thumbs up popping up.
Awesome.
Yes.
Awesome.
Awesome. All right. Do we think we've got it? So we are giving authority to the Air District to finalize this letter and proceed with that March extension request. And then we will then move forward with agendas in the future meetings, which have not yet been confirmed, as Jamie just mentioned, but the future meetings will reflect the work plan that we showed you that basically will help us map to March, CERP development by March. So we're going to identify specific action items for each meeting moving forward to get us to that point. And then we'll agendize all the necessary things you requested. So voting and getting you materials in advance and all of that. We'll flag all of that and you'll have a really clear idea of how to get this CERP developed in advance of the March meeting, technically, so you can review the final and vote on the final in time for early March for voting and then mid-March for the Air District Board meeting. So that's exciting news. Great job, guys. So we are officially, and I can't see questions. My internet is still dead. It's coming back on, but I did want to ask Hannah if there's any hands before we move to our wrap up and public comment.
Yes, Regina has a hand. I don't see Regina anymore. Regina is still with us? I don't see Regina and I don't see any more hands.
Perfect. All right, I think I'm back. Hi, everybody. Let's see if we've got any public comments.
We do not.
Nothing on Facebook, nothing on the chat, and nothing in email. So we will be sending out a list of the next meetings via Zoom again and for the foreseeable future. And basically what I think you're hearing from today's meeting is that we want to meet the objectives of the extension, and in good faith, we want to build out a work plan that reflects that. So you will have standing meetings, but then we're going to add in some extras. And I think you saw that we might need to add in a few extra meetings to give us enough time to have the deliberation that you want, to have the conversations you want, to really hone in, especially on those yellow and red items. And then we're going to do another sorting exercise in the near future for the measures we haven't talked about yet, so that we can really think comprehensively about this and that make this CERP exactly what you want it to be. So before we do full wrap up, I want to hand it back over to our hosts at the Air District. Any final words or comments before we close down the meeting today?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that once again, we share our appreciation with all of you. I think we got a tremendous amount of work done today. So appreciative of everybody's time and efforts. Also want to wish everybody a very happy holidays. Take this time, hopefully you spend it with family in whatever format or form that may take, socially distanced or Zoom forums. But yeah, just wish everyone best wishes, and we'll see you in 2021.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan.
Holiday.
Happy holidays, everybody. And I do see in the chat the comments about the camp. We're certainly going to incorporate those into the agendas as we can. So that has not been forgotten, and the record will reflect. So thank you. Happy holidays, everybody. Happy belated Thanksgiving, and happy whatever you celebrate in December.
Co-host. Final comments from co-host.
Co-host.
No, just thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate everyone's time and effort and energy that we're putting forward. And you know what? We are making a difference. And thank you.
Awesome. Nice job, Stacy.
Do we have a co-host for next time? Just curious.
Heather, you're
for January. I think we'll have to send out a request via email, maybe when we do our meeting note. Apologies, when my internet died, I lost my notes.
Unless you guys want to drop your name in the chat box, indicating that you would like to co-host in January. Okay. Well, it looks like Erica lost her internet, and this is a good sign that this meeting is adjourned. Happy holidays, everyone. And we'll see you soon.
Okay, bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Real quick, sorry. I know
I am still on.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure everything was okay.